If we're looking for a guide with handy hints, you'd be better off somewhere else. In this guide, not only are there no handy hints, there are no tantalising texts and no strats, sneaky, subtle or otherwise. My name is the Law Guy, and it is my solemn duty to bring to light the dark secrets of the Deshayes Twins as they ply their trade as killers in the service of the entity. But you at home have no such obligation. I would recommend to all our viewers right now to look away and go and view a guide to a more beloved killer instead. This guide will be confusing, demoralising and obtuse, a word which here means confusing and demoralising. This is because there are very few happy things to talk about when it comes to the Deshayes Twins. Charlotte and Victor are wonderful killers. They are strategic and versatile and complex and have a sky-high skill ceiling. But they are also extremely unlucky. They are cursed with a terrible public image. Almost everyone who talks about their power writes it off as for nothing more than frustration, misery and despair. I am deeply sorry to have to tell you this, but that's how the story goes. The Twins are a killer that has been out for about 6 months at time of writing. Since they are on the PTB, they have been maligned by most of the Dead by Daylight player base, a term which here means strongly disliked because they were released with lots of bugs and gameplay oversights. And despite most of the bugs being patched out, the Twins remain a maligned killer because of the way they are perceived to play. The Twins have a reputation for being a killer that often results in unpleasant gameplay for the survivors' side when played optimally, which is a reputation that in all my months of research I've never fully understood. Yes, when played absolutely optimally with a mind geared solely to winning a match, the Twins player will often resort to camping, slugging excessively, or doing other things that survivors dislike, often combined with heavy game delay and general aggression perks. But I think it's worth mentioning that every killer in Dead by Daylight has a power that, when used optimally, makes the game miserable for the survivors, and the stronger killers leverage those same slowdown perks to make the game just as miserable, if not more so. Take the Blight for example, largely considered by much of the community to be one of the best designed killers in recent memory, despite his power being very, very good at making the game very, very miserable. Viewed from a cynic's perspective, the Blight is one of the best tunnelers in the game, since he can run across the entire map to return to a freshly unhooked survivor with a single use of his power and down them again immediately, as well as effectively ignore decisive strike by being able to catch up instantly after a survivor stuns him and tries to make distance. His incredible mobility with no setup time, minimal terrain restrictions and almost no downtime means that he uses perks like Hex Ruin and Tinkerer with degenerate effectiveness, and oppressively powerful add-ons like Alchemist's Ring, Iridescent Blight Tag and Compound 33 only add to the frustration of playing against him. And yet the Blight is widely considered one of Dead by Daylight's best made killers, because despite his power being one that can result in unpleasant gameplay situations, it's also one with a high mechanical skill requirement and enough power and flexibility that you can win most of your games without having to play like that. Blight's degeneracy potential only matters when you have a player determined to optimise the fun out of him. It would be unfair to judge the Blight's power based on the actions of those players, and the same logic applies to the Twins. The Twins have the most flexible and versatile power in Dead by Daylight, and the fact that with that flexibility comes the potential to play the killer in a degenerate way, that's the price you pay when you make a strong and unique killer. And don't misunderstand me here, the Twins are most definitely a strong killer. Dowsey has demonstrated that with his 200 win streak on the killer shortly after their release, and they've even had limited showings in tournament play. But while Dowsey and the tournament scene have demonstrated how powerful the Twins can be when played completely optimally, when the sole condition is to win a tournament or add another tally to a streak, I don't think that's how the average player should be looking to play the Twins if they want to make sure that they're enjoying themselves while winning games. it isn't typically fun to one-hook, slug, or tunnel a player out the game match after match after match, which is fine because you don't actually have to do that. This is not something you'll hear from many big-name content creators or their audiences when they talk about the twins. Often they're made out to be completely useless when played in a relatively fun and fair way. And to those people, I ask, do you see the twins enough to stand by that conclusion? Do you play them yourselves? Do you play against them much? I'm willing to bet probably not on all counts. From what I can tell, most people who've had the worst to say about the twins played them maybe for a couple of games on the PTB or when they were fresh to live servers, or watched creators who did and then never gave them a second look. And while we don't have any current data to support that, anecdotal evidence from most people I talk to would suggest that the twins are among one of the least played killers in the game. I mean this as kindly as possible when I say that community ignorance is the biggest obstacle that the twins have. They are a complex killer that has been out for a long time, and is hardly ever played. Most of what they can do when mastered is still a mystery, even to people like me who've been playing them since they came out. But until that perception of them being an inherently unhealthy killer is broken, the twins would largely remain neglected, forgotten, and ignored. That's what I'm here to try to prevent. Dowsy and the comp teams have shown us that twins can be strong, but I'm here to show you that twins can be more than strong enough for the average player to enjoy, while still being a ton of fun. If you're familiar enough with the twins that you don't need me to tell you the basics, skip to the timestamp on screen now to get straight to the section about builds and playstyles. The fundamental base of the twins is Charlotte, who's just a regular 115% movement speed killer with a 32m terror radius. Nothing special really, she just gets the job done. The most unique part about Charlotte herself is the fact that her breathing is incredibly quiet. Most of the time that you hear ambient sounds from the twins, it's if Victor is attached to her, and he's making his sounds. Charlotte's breathing is almost completely silent. But they really start to get interesting when we talk about Victor, her brother and co-killer who you can unbind from Charlotte at the start of the match. Victor functions completely differently from everything else in Dead by Daylight. For starters, he's not actually considered to be a killer in any way, whether you're controlling him or not. He's considered a part of Charlotte's power, like a huntress hatchet or a trickster knife. Meaning perks that interact with the killer do not interact with him. Killer perks like a nurse's calling and discordance that give the killer aura reading, but Victor isn't the killer, so you do not get the benefit of that aura reading while controlling him. But on the flip side, survivor perks interact with the killer do not affect him either. Perks like Dark Sense or Kindred that show you the killer's aura will not reveal Victor, and not even Spine Chill will pick him up. He's also not considered interactable, like a Trapper Trap or a Hex Totem, so things like Detective's Hunch and the Red Triad on foot maps will also not detect him. He also has projectile hitboxes rather than killer hitboxes, meaning that some of the invisible walls, like the ones you'll see on Ormond or Haddonfield, do not apply to Victor. Victor's base movement speed is 150% of a survivor's running speed, taking him to 6 meters per second. That's as fast as a sprint bursting survivor or a cloaked wraith. He has no terror radius, instead having something called a shriek radius that survivors can listen out for. While it is much smaller than a terror radius, it is directional to make tracking his location a little bit easier. He also has no red stain, and Charlotte loses her terror radius and red stain completely while the killer player controls Victor. He cannot perform many interactions that a normal killer can perform, such as breaking pallets or breakable walls, vault windows, carry survivors, or even perform a basic attack. He also can't see the scratch marks caused by a running survivor, but can see survivor bloodstains in a much brighter red as a trade-off, giving him a built-in version of Bloodhound or the Spirit's Father the Glasses add-on. In addition, Victor running after a survivor will not count as a chase for the purposes of any chase-based mechanics. This means Victor will not gain Bloodlust, windows don't get blocked after the survivor ults them 3 times, and neither player participating in the chase will receive chaser blood points or emblem progression. Instead of a basic attack, Victor attacks survivors by performing a pounce, which takes 1 second of charge time for being able to use. While charging a pounce, Victor will move at 2.4 meters per second and have his vertical range of vision restricted, and all pounce charge progress will be reset if you fall off a ledge while charging it. Firing a pounce sends Victor flying through the air at 746% speed, which for comparison is 39% faster than a Demogorgon Shred, but about 25% slower than a Huntress Hatchet. Unlike Shred, Pounce also has a vertical element that can take Victor over the tops of pallets and windows to hit survivors, but survivors can crouch to cause Victor to go flying over them if aimed poorly. If Victor's Pounce collides with terrain or misses completely, he will suffer a 3-second cooldown before being able to move properly or charge up another Pounce. However, if he hits a survivor, one of two things will happen. If he hits an injured survivor, they will go down and put Victor into a 5-second cooldown. But if the target is healthy, he will instead injure them and attach to their back, returning killer control to Charlotte immediately. Survivors with Victor attached to them are afflicted with 3 status effects for as long as he remains attached: Broken, Oblivious, and Incapacitated, a new status effect that was until recently unique to the twins. Incapacitated survivors are unable to work on generators, interact with other survivors in any way, use items like flashlights, and importantly, keys, or cleanse totems. Victor also puts an exit gate blocker, like a single target Blood Warden, on any survivor he's attached to, which will linger for 5 seconds if they are put into the dying state while Victor is still attached. This is to give Charlotte enough time to wipe her weapon and pick up the survivor before they can crawl out of the exit gate. Survivors can complete an 8-second animation to remove Victor and send him back to Charlotte, or the killer can manually recall Victor back to Charlotte after 30 seconds of remaining attached. Which brings us to returning to Charlotte from Victor. Other than moving and pouncing, the only thing you can actually do after switching to Victor is switch back to Charlotte, which will leave Victor in an idle state and return you to Charlotte after a 3-second fatigue animation. In addition to this, survivors can force you to return to Charlotte in a number of ways. They can crush Victor with a swift kick during the cooldown after a pounce, whether you hit or miss. They can hit Victor with head-on or stun him with a pallet to also kill him and force a return to Charlotte. And stunning Charlotte with a pallet while Victor is being controlled will automatically force the killer player to snap back to Charlotte and leave Victor in the idle state where he was. Victor will also die on his own if he ends his pounce in an out of bounds area or goes somewhere he can't physically fit. But we'll be going into more detail on that in a later episode, because that rule is extremely flexible, and most of the high points of the twins' skill ceiling revolves around playing with it. No matter how he died or was recalled, Victor can be redeployed by unbinding from Charlotte again after 6 seconds. Obviously, you want to avoid being kicked in most circumstances, so you might think that an idle Victor is something you might want to avoid. But the opposite is often true. When Charlotte is being controlled, Victor's shriek radius that survivors use to detect him becomes an asset, as any moving or downed survivor within that shriek radius has a location revealed to Charlotte by killer instinct detection, kind of similar to the one that the Legion has. This applies not just to an idle Victor, but also when he's attached to a survivor, allowing you to pick up the locations of any teammates around Victor's new babysitter. However, if a survivor is standing still, or doing another stationary action like repairing a generator, or if they're crouch walking, then Victor will not pick them up. And he also does not show the location of anyone he's attached to, although you can see his aura at the very start of the attachment process, and after 30 seconds, so you have some amount of tracking on where he is. I just spent 1,000 words and 7 minutes going over the absolute basics and fundamentals of their power. Not how to use it, none of the advanced interactions like lockers and windows, not add-ons, not perks, nothing except the absolute basics. You see what I mean when I said this killer is complex and flexible, right? The twins have everything a killer could want: map mobility, snowballing, stealth potential, loop denial, tracking, and even disabling actions. But the power of all those different elements is carefully kept in check by inbuilt mechanisms to limit the twins' power. Victor's snowballing, for example, is limited by the fact that survivors can kick him after a successful hit, to stop him chaining downs together. And the map ability that he offers is restricted by the fact that Charlotte is still 115% and has to footslog normally. There's now the matter of bringing it all together, so to speak. How do you take all these separate elements and use them together to win a game? Well, a lot of it depends on the perks you're using. I know Deshayes will deploy Victor in the extreme early game, and use him to flush individual survivors off of generators. This is because he builds around Hex, Ruin and Thanatophobia as his slowdown perks of choice. Both passive slowdown options that work well in an extremely aggressive playstyle as you look to end the game early, usually by slugging. His build, and a build I often see Twins players defaulting to, is Hex Ruin, Hex Undying, Thanatophobia and a long range tracking perk, usually either barbecue and chili or more likely discordance. This is undoubtedly an extremely powerful build, but it is not one that I would recommend for the average Twins player. The main reason being that this build is very feast or famine, requires an extreme level of proficiency and ruthlessness to mitigate the famine, and promotes a style of playing the Twins that, while effective at tallying up wins in a streak, doesn't often result in enjoyable games for either side. If you'll take a look at the perks that Deshayes ran in Otz's Best of the Best challenge, you'll notice that all the perks he tends to run are at their strongest in the early game, before survivors start to die and drop off precipitously by the end. A word which here means sharply towards impending doom. Hex Ruin and by extension Hex Undying are perks that only work in the early stages of the game, forcing survivors to surrender much of their early gen pressure to find totems, or have their progress eaten up by Victor as he chases them off generators. Those perks will only help you as long as the totems stay lit. Once they're gone, they're gone. Thanatophobia and Discordance are also perks that are at their best when all 4 survivors are still alive, with Thana permanently losing value as soon as someone dies, and Discordance being less likely to trigger once someone's out of the game. This build works, as I said earlier, by using Victor extremely aggressively in the early game to harass survivors off generators before they can find your hexes. Then try to end the game prematurely by slugging while Ruin eats up any generator progress that they might have gotten to make recovery completely impossible. Deshayes makes this plan extremely consistent by being an experienced killer player and playing ruthlessly to ensure survivors do not have a chance to reset and prolong the game, ensuring he gets the benefit from the early game feast of power without having to deal with the famine of having your early game perks drop off in effectiveness. If you look at tournament Twins players using that build or something similar to it, you'll see where that build can come unstuck. When survivors are coordinated and prepared enough to force constant resets against the Twins, with a hyper aggro build, the game grinds to a halt very quickly. And as survivors heal and cleanse totems, those slowdown perks become less and less effective. They force a long game that the survivors will eventually win by robbing the killer of the early game momentum that they need. Eventually, they force a Twins player to taste the famine by rendering the early game feast of power useless. This is where I am here to advocate an alternative build, one designed to grind out those long games and really take advantage of the fact that the average survivor team does not have the coordination to pressure the right gens early as well as a comp team does, by trading a weaker early game for a grindy late game plan that prioritises getting hook states and reach resetting extremely awkward. The core perk that makes the whole build tick is Sloppy Butcher, because unlike Deshayes, I don't send Victor out at the beginning of the match. I instead take that time to get to survivors with Charlotte, get some cheeky early hits and apply Sloppy before sending out Victor to clean up. With Sloppy you can afford to switch targets and get multiple injuries if you want before letting Victor loose. It can force survivors to burn through their medkits early, and if they're planning on wasting the time healing to stop Victor from getting an early down, that's absolutely fine. That just gives more time to make use of your next perk, Pop Goes the Weasel. This is my primary game delay perk, and unlike Ruin, it gets better as the game goes on and you get hook states. As survivors complete generators and you have fewer and fewer gens to protect, Pop becomes more valuable to lock down problematic areas, and repeated pops can utterly annihilate survivors' attempts to force a particular gen through. Sloppy also provides handy utility that's very specific to the Twins. Survivors bleeding more off the hemorrhage makes Victor tracking them substantially easier, especially on dark maps. In addition, one of the worst things you can see as a Twins player is getting it down with Victor, someone kicking him, and then immediately starting to pick up this person that you downed. Sloppy is one of the few perks in Dead by Daylight to slow down the picking up process, and despite only adding a few seconds, Those few seconds can be the difference between keeping your victim on the ground and hitting the rescuer, or the slug getting picked up and running away with an exhaustion perk before Charlotte can make it over for a pickup. In my tracking perk slot, you usually find me rocking barbecue and chili, another perk that gets stronger the more hook states you get. It informs you of which generator to target with pop, or can show you someone healing in the distance to intercept with Victor. I'm known to run Whispers sometimes as an alternative, as an invaluable tool to find the first survivors and get those critical M1s in early, but truth be told, I can't resist the blood points. And as for my fourth perk, I like to bring something that helps you get the early M1s that you need to help ensure the game lasts long enough for your late game perks to take over. Until recently, that perk was always Corrupt Intervention, to mitigate the issues of big maps and force survivors to approach you if they want to do gens early. I still like Corrupt a lot, but I've also been getting a lot of mileage out of Monitor and Abuse in this slot. In this build, it functions very similarly to running Monitor on Oni. It lets you catch survivors off guard and hit people who don't realise you're as close as you are, applying Sloppy and forcing them into a chase with Victor before they can react. Monitor combined with the Twins' custom terror radius really helps confuse survivors, especially because you don't hear it that much in most Twins games, because it turns off whenever Victor is being controlled. Again, the perk that makes the whole build tick is Sloppy Butcher, a perk that punishes survivors for healing and resetting by making it take longer, while the Twins themselves incentivize survivors to constantly reset to stay safe from Victor. And this build, unlike the Ruin Undying build, promotes getting hooks with Charlotte to squeeze value out of your perks. This build leads to much closer games as a rule than the Ruin Undying build, because survivors are liable to push gens through in the early to mid game before your hook stats start to add up and survivors start dying. If you ask me, games being longer and closer is a surefire way to make a game more fun for both sides. I can't tell you how many games I've played where I've been on the back foot for most of the game, struggling to pop the same gen over and over again, and suddenly feel the pressure release like deflating a balloon when the first survivor dies on your 8th hook, and their resources have been so exhausted that you know they're not coming back from this. That to me is what makes Dead by Daylight fun. It's the 10 rounds in the ring to see who hits the canvas first. Winning the game at 5 gens and 4 hooks because you slugged the whole team with Ruin up isn't fun for me, and nor is losing both your gen regression perks within 40 seconds of the match starting because of bad totem RNG, forcing you to have to play extra ruthlessly to try to scrape a win at all. And I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one here. I mean, if you want to play in that way, then I am not going to tell you you're wrong. You play this game the way you want to. But if you want to play a longer, closer, arguably more rewarding game of Twins, this is how you do it. My general play pattern follows this formula. Get an injury or 2 in at the start of the game, release Victor to get down on one of them before they can make too much distance from Charlotte, and then find something else useful for him to do. If there's someone working on a generator nearby, for example, you can always attach to your new playmate and keep them from healing the slug or doing gens until your original target is hooked and your pop is deployed. Alternatively, you could keep Victor in the area of the down to make sure that nobody picks the survivor up or to help you find the slug. Put him somewhere high so you can scout the area for more survivors the next time you switch back. Or keep him on top of a generator that you intend to pop to make sure no one tries to squeeze it through while you're hooking. If you really don't know what to do, you could even jump somewhere you're not supposed to go and die so that Victor is back with Charlotte for the next chase. At this point, a lot of players will put Victor under the hook to camp the survivor you've just hooked. And I mean, you can do that, but I wouldn't recommend it. Right now, there's a bug that allows you to sometimes unhook with Victor attached, meaning that a healthy survivor can bypass the camping Victor with no qualms half the time. And even in isolation of that, the whole point of this build is to use Charlotte and Victor in tandem to get downs quickly and build up hook states. You can't do that if the only power you have is sitting under someone's hook, waiting for someone to just crouch walk over and kick him out from under the hook anyway. Victor camping hooks is an irritation for both sides, but not much more than that, and the worst bit is that it can be done by accident sometimes. Occasionally you just leave Victor where you got the down, and that happens to be close to the hook you're planning on using. This is when suiciding Victor into impassable terrain can be useful to bring him back immediately to Charlotte without having to move somewhere twice to ensure you have him on hand for a chase. Honestly, this is one area I would love to see changed about the Twins. if the process of resetting Victor to Charlotte once someone was hooked too close to him became automatic. It would put camping with Victor into the grave for good, as well as make Chase Twins a little bit smoother to play, by always allowing him to be available in Chase if you need him to be. It would be a change for the benefit of both sides, and it's been demanded since they came out. Frankly, I'm astounded Behaviour hasn't implemented it yet. If you want to hear more about changes that I'd recommend for the twins, stick around till the end of the video. But before we continue with the sorry story of the Deshayes Twins, I have a grim revelation. News so darkly heinous and heinously dark that you may never get a good night's sleep again. I've opened a merch store. Despite everything that you've just learned and everything that you're going to go on to know, it is worth reminding you that the twins are an unfortunate and miserable pair of killers. And as such, no happy and joyful person such as yourself could be seen wearing merchandise to support them. And as a result, I must warn you, do not purchase the Peekaboo Victor T from Pixel's Stuff Purchasing Zone on Teespring. The art was designed by Miljami, an extremely talented artist and creative mind through no fault of her own. The design ought not to be purchased on a t-shirt, hoodie, or any of the other myriad places where you can find Victor peering out of your chest to say hello. Once again, I must reinforce, do not go to Pixel's Stuff Purchasing Zone on Teespring, link in the description. For your safety, for your comfort, and to avoid awkward questions from friends and family when you meet them for new post-COVID lunches. Thank you. Now, to continue with the guide. In terms of the process of getting downs with Victor, a lot of survivors will make it fairly easy for you. The twins are not a commonly played killer, and their counterplay is not too well known or understood, so a lot of survivors will just try to loop him like a regular killer by holding W to make as much distance as they can before dropping pallets at the last minute. I'll say this now. If a survivor thinks it's a good idea to drop a pallet in the face of a Victor with a pounce charged up, they are a dingleberry and you can easily hit them. You can fire over the top of the pallet or even under it during the drop animation just like Huntress does. Although with limited vertical control, you have to take the pallet quite wide, and it can take practice to get the height right to secure a hit. Some things survivors can do to make your life harder will be to crouch at the high end of drop pallets or at windows to prevent Victor from being able to draw lines of sight with a pounce. At very short loops, that won't work because you can navigate Victor around the loop faster than they can vault back and forth, to stop them denying you line of sight. But at longer loops you might have serious trouble and will often have to double back to bait the survivor into vaulting into you. There are also a lot of environmental objects that you can look out for that will be invaluable to shutting down certain loops. Those opportunities get even richer when you use Charlotte and Victor together to tackle super safe loops that neither twin could manage alone. But I'll be saving these for a future video, because this one's already getting super long, and talking about them fully will require a lot of explaining about the precise rules of their collision. For now, the other things you have to worry about are lockers and survivors trying to spin you. Survivors can hop in lockers mid-chase to deny you a pounce hit. Instead of pouncing, Victor can check lockers, and if a survivor is found inside, will hold the locker door shut for 10 seconds. The twins player now has 10 seconds to get Charlotte to that locker and stop the survivor from escaping, killing Victor in the process. Interestingly, the act of removing Victor from the locker causes the survivor to be forced to leave it, which offers a few options for the twins player. If the survivor is injured, Charlotte can just M1 them to put them on the ground anyway, and this means the twins are the only killer that can force a survivor with a decisive strike to leave a locker to get slugged, and the only killer who can force survivors to expose themselves with Iron Maiden. Or if you get there in time, you can just pull them out of the locker. Survivors will often also try to spin or dodge Victor at point blank range by running around in little circles to make aiming your pounce harder, or running around a small obstacle like a boulder, a tree or a fire barrel to not give you time to charge a pounce. Landing a pounce at point blank range can be surprisingly hard to do if survivors try this stuff, but there are tricks you can do to make it easier. If you look carefully at Victor's hands when a pounce is charged, you'll see a little square he makes with his fingers. Treat that area as a crosshair to show you approximately where your pounce is going to be taking you, and you can hold that square until the survivor who's spinning crosses over into it. Trying to follow their spins will likely only disorient you. It's far better to let them run straight into your line of fire. Survivors who use small obstacles can be harder, but there are ways around them too. The most consistent one that I find is to half charge a pounce, chasing them normally to incentivize them to keep running, then immediately dial back and fully charge a pounce in the other direction, ready to fire instantly as soon as the survivor steps into your targeting square. This can require a lot of precision, and survivors you play against might start to see it coming, but then it becomes an informed 50-50 on whether you're planning to dial back or not. But it's one of the best ways to handle survivors trying to juke you at a range where even the slightest movement from them can completely throw off your aim. But once you get it down, your problems aren't over. If a survivor is nearby, you have every chance to get kicked and get sent back to Charlotte anyway, which is where my build starts to come into its own. You probably injured them with Charlotte at the start, meaning they're not too far away from you if you got them down quickly, and they have Sloppy Butcher applied to them, meaning their friend is slowed down picking them up. Both of these increase your chances of securing a pickup with Charlotte before they can get the slug up, even if they bring we're going to live forever. If they get the slug up just in time, you often find yourself with a choice. Do I hit the healthy person who just picked them up to secure a second injury, or do I put the slug back down on the floor? I like hitting the healthy person, because 2 injured people trying to distance from you can mean 2 back-to-back downs with Victor, as you amplify your pressure enormously. It also plays around Soul Guard. After securing a down, you'll be able to be kicked for 5 seconds, which is the result of a recent nerf that I still didn't believe did what it was set out to do. The goal of that nerf was apparently to discourage the twins from slugging, but all it does is punish the twins for getting a down, whether you choose to slug with Victor or immediately switch to Charlotte for a pickup. Bad survivors who didn't kick you in the old 3-second window still don't kick you now, and good survivors were kicking you in the first place will still be kicking you obviously, so it didn't actually change anything. All it did was make the twins feel worse to play for no reason at all, like a reverse quality of life change, and to this day I am still arguing for it to be reverted. And now I've mentioned this, I just want to outline the changes that I would make to the twins if I was in charge of Behaviour's balancing team. Implement the aforementioned anti-camping mechanism, revert the Victor hit cooldown nerf because that was completely idiotic and changed nothing except made my life more awkward, double Victor's respawn time if he was kicked after missing a pounce to punish Twins players who misuse Victor, allow the Twins player to switch to Charlotte during Victor's post-hit cooldown so you can get a pickup faster and you're rewarded for getting a down if you choose not to slug, cut 1 second off Charlotte's 3-second fatigue to make it a little bit smoother to play, and make survivors with Victor attached unable to leave through the hatch until they take the 8 seconds to remove him because it makes Victor not completely useless in a hatch game. There. These changes are mostly numbers shifts to promote the twins playing in a more fun and interactive playstyle while punishing them appropriately for mistakes, and I honestly believe this would be a massive step forward to making the twins a much less hated killer. I love the twins. I don't want to see them get the Freddy treatment by having them reworked into a shadow of what they currently are, because they have so much unique stuff going on. Hopefully, thanks not just this guide but all the episodes to come, I can win you over too, and the unfortunate tale of the Deshayes Twins can have a happy ending after all. 1,000 thank yous both to my loyal Twitch subscribers and those maniacs on Patreon who help keep the lights on here and justify me being able to continue making this for you. I'll be back to a normal lore video next week, but I'll be dropping in episodes of the guide, probably on a one after the other basis, so we'll go guide, and then lore video, and then guide. Add it, and continue on that path until the guide is complete. So until then, thank you so much for being here. As always, it really does mean the world to me. So I'll see you next time. Ta-ta for now.